In the age of the modern political campaign, spouses and children often play a key role, not only supporting the candidate, but helping to carry the message. The unwritten rule, however, is that the families should be off limits from political attacks. That rule was broken a few weeks ago when Melania Trump was attacked in an ad by an anti-Trump super PAC. And then, days later, the wife of Senator Ted Cruz, Heidi Cruz, found herself the target of an unflattering tweet in what became a campaign controversy that lasted for days. But Heidi Cruz is not a political novice. She met her husband while working as a political advisor on the Bush for President campaign back in 2000. She is currently on leave as a managing director at the banking firm Goldman Sachs in Houston, Texas. And she sat down with yours truly earlier to take questions about her husband, his campaign, and the clash that recently made her a household name. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Megan. Great to be here with you.
So let's talk about you. You were raised in California, the daughter of two missionaries. How did it change you? How did it affect you to be raised by such devout Christians?
Well, my parents are incredible people, and it's so important to have parents who teach you things and who give you principles to live by. And my parents are people who practice what they preach. My dad's a small-town dentist. My mom's a dental hygienist. And they always believed in just the view that we are here for a short time on this earth and that we really live for others and that we can make a big difference in this world if we live our lives for others.
Now, is it true that when you were in 5th grade, you knew you wanted to go to Harvard Business School?
Well, I was raised in a small town on a small farm, and my parents really instilled in us the value of hard work. And I do remember when I was out, we weeded a lot of corn, we picked a lot of berries, and when my brother and I were young, we wanted a little bit of pay for that work, and so we asked my dad if we could be paid a little more for our chores. And he said, you know, if you want to make some money, why don't you go start a business? And so when my brother and I were 6 and 8, we started a bread business. We had it for over 10 years, and we competed. We started our own companies. My brother bought me out for a period. I figured out it was better to work for yourself than for someone else. So I love business from a young age. But the things that you learn when you have a business as a kid, I think, are really invaluable. It got me interested in business, and then my parents exposed us to a lot of things, and I was interested in business school from a young age.
And amazingly, you wound up there. You went to Harvard Business School. You have an MBA from Harvard Business School. And then shortly after that, you met your husband, Ted Cruz, while you were both working on George W. Bush's presidential campaign. What first attracted you to Ted?
Well, you know, Ted has a very rare combination that I spotted immediately, which is he has a deep, deep intelligence, but at the same time, he's a lot of fun. Ted has an incredible command of pop culture, too much for his own good, probably. He's a big movie buff. He loves to play games. Ted will stay up all night if he's playing a card game or playing chess, and he's really good. And it's fun to be around someone who is so smart and so intelligent.
Do you remember a specific moment where you started to think, he might be the one for me?
Well, Ted and I both say, and we said it at the time, it really was love at first sight. And I'm not a big risk taker, so I was sort of surprised to fall in love with someone so quickly. But I saw in Ted somebody who had the qualities that I just described, but who also questions the status quo, who sees possibility where others don't. And I knew that this was a person who, like I described my parents, was going to have a real impact. And
did you know that? I mean, at the time, did you think this could be a future president of the United States?
I didn't think this could be a future president of the United States, but I thought this is going to be a person that's going to be a doer.
Now, you know that people will say, oh, nobody's ever liked Ted Cruz. People in law school didn't like Ted Cruz, and they don't like him in the U.S. Senate. Did he have friends? Did people like him?
Well, I'm glad that you asked that question because I want all of his friends here to hear on your show that one of the things that attracted me most to Ted Cruz was all of his friends. When you meet someone and you meet their friends and the people they associate with, and it even more deepens your conviction that this is the right person for you. So this likability thing really is, I think, a misnomer for people who aren't getting much done.
Was it a happy time? You know, you're young, you're newly married, you're building your careers.
It was an incredibly happy time. We were great newlyweds. You know, one of my favorite stories that I do tell because it says a lot about Ted is a very low-key person. He's a man who's easy to live with. The night we got married, we came home from our honeymoon, and he went out and bought 100 cans of chunky soup. and stocked the pantry. Well, I grew up on a farm where you make your own pasta, right? So this was not happening. So I, the next morning, loaded 100 cans of soup back in the car and returned them all.
Why did he want 100 cans of soup?
Because he can eat a can of soup for dinner. Our potential next president of the United States might have a can of soup for dinner. This is a person who's very easy. And so he said, well, unless you're going to cook, and Megan, I'm a terrible cook. I've tried, and I've burned most things. I'm doing 3 other things at the same time. So I did have to go back and buy those cans of soup. My mother said, if you're not going to cook every night, you should let the man have his soup.
He became the Solicitor General for the state of Texas, which is basically the chief appeals lawyer. So he goes into court and argues on behalf of the state when they get in a jam. So he moves down to Austin. He has to go to Austin, Texas for that. You have a thriving career in Washington, and for a time you lived apart, right?
Yeah, we commuted. We saw each other almost every single weekend. And it was a strain.
And then that got old.
It was a strain. It got old. Yeah, it was hard.
So you decide you're going to move down to Texas to be closer to Ted, but you didn't go to Austin. You wound up going to Houston, where you took a job with Merrill Lynch, because that was where the best offer was. Those are only 3 hours apart, right? Houston and Austin. So it was an improvement.
It can't be 2.5.
Okay, so it was an improvement. I mean, like, because a lot of people say, why didn't you go to Austin?
Right. Exactly.
You described that as a rough patch for you, and there was some news made about how rough it was for you at the time. Do you feel like it was humbling? Here you are, Harvard Business School, work for the Bush administration, hotshot in the investment banking industry, making it as a woman in a man's world, married to a powerful guy, Solicitor General of Texas. And yet, even somebody like you can go through a tough time where you feel sadness and you struggle.
Absolutely. It was humbling. And the thing that I want to convey to people in this country, to Americans, but to women specifically, but really to men too professionally, is being humble is so important. And as you go through different transitions in your life, if you're willing to start over sometimes, if you're willing to always work hard, no job's too small, no job's too big, and you see possibility like Ted does where others don't, it can be a much smoother path. And so what was humbling for me was in my spiritual walk. It was so humbling to know that God has an incredible plan for my life, and regardless of what your beliefs are, what your religion is, if you believe that there's a reason that you're placed on this earth and there's a long-term plan, you can follow that and not need to control everything. And what was really humbling was to realize that my ability to contribute and to serve others was not oriented towards a geography. It was oriented towards developing the talents that God had given me in my partnership with Ted.
And then you have 2 young daughters. You have two children on top of it. So how did 2 busy professionals like you and Ted at that time manage all of that at once?
One thing that I think is so important is to recognize that if you have a lot going on in your life, you need to ask people for help. And our families were incredibly helpful.
Do you ever have working mother guilt?
You know, what's been interesting is someone told me this, and it's so true. If the parents are happy with the trade-offs they've made, there's not a lot of working mother guilt if your kids are happy. And I found that when, as Ted and I have been really, we communicate a lot, and as we've made deliberative decisions about the trade-offs that we've made, that our kids are really happy because they know their parents are happy.
So now Ted comes home one day and says, I have this great idea. I'm going to run for U.S. Senate. And he runs and wins. And then a day came in the future where he came home and said, I have another great idea. I'm going to run for president. How did that conversation go?
You know, Megan, it was so interesting. You might go through this with your husband. When you're doing something for your spouse only, and you feel like you've already done a lot for your spouse and vice versa. Ted has been so supportive of me as well. But you start to think about those trade-offs and if you're willing to do it for them. And I did get a little bit itchy. I just wasn't sure. We had just gone through a Senate race. Things were kind of settled. I was running the group at the time, running the group, and our girls were young. And it hit me one day, if Ted could even be a voice in this election for constitutional freedoms, for economic growth, security for our families, that we should be part of this. Ted is just too talented to be out of the debate.
What about, when you're actually out on the campaign trail? We've heard, obviously, Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, there's not a lot of love lost there these days. And he's taken to referring to Ted as Lion Ted. Lion Ted. How does that wash with you?
Well, if there's one thing that's true about Ted, it's that he always tells the truth.
So you can just brush that stuff off.
I brush it off because I think these attacks on character are a distraction.
Recently, Donald Trump sent out an unkind retweet about you, comparing your appearance unfavorably to that of his wife, Melania Trump, who is a retired model. How did that retweet first come to your attention?
Well, one great thing about me, Megan, is I don't tweet. So I had an ability to completely ignore it. And, you know, I think we have a pattern of behavior here that when Donald Trump is falling behind, you know, it's interesting the timing of that was right before Ted's sweeping victory in Utah.
Yeah, but that's a dodge. I'm wondering whether, like, who told you about it and how it made you feel?
You and Carly, my dear friend Carly, and myself have been the object of some of Donald's criticisms. But I will tell you, I know why we're running this race, and it's not for Donald Trump. It is for the voters of this country. And when you have a husband who's standing by you that is so strong and so unflappable, it really gives me a lot of strength. And so I really have to honestly say, it didn't impact me in the least. I have one job on this campaign, and that is to get out and tell the voters who Ted Cruz is. And when telling the truth about who your husband is your job, it's pretty easy, and it's been great for our marriage. So because I don't tweet, because I know what my job is on the campaign, and because I know that every time the Trump campaign starts to lose, they throw in distractions of personal destruction.
Donald Trump, in his defense, he was upset because he felt that his wife had been hit in a super PAC ad that featured Melania that Ted Cruz has made very clear he had nothing to do with, but he was upset. That was motivation.
Well, I will say our campaign never will, never has engaged in the politics of personal destruction. As you know, the PAC structure is such that we don't coordinate. It wasn't even a Ted Cruz PAC. He said that many times. That PAC has attacked us.
It was an anti-Trump PAC.
And that PAC has attacked us. So I think that that has been cleared.
One last question on Trump. He also sent out a tweet threatening to spill the beans on you. Do you know what that's a reference to, and does that bother you?
As so many things that Donald Trump says and engages in have no basis in reality. I know my track record, I know my life record pretty well. It didn't bother me a bit. I think a lot of things he throws out there that have no basis in reality, and it's kind of fallen off there.
Ted says there are no beans, but we have found out tonight there is soup. So just FYI, there's a soup and there's a lot of it, apparently. Things have gotten unfortunate more than once in this campaign, including a nasty National Enquirer story about Ted allegedly engaging in extramarital affairs. I asked him about it directly. He says it's absolutely false and went after the National Enquirer and its publisher. Do you want to comment on that?
It's garbage. It's just garbage. This is another example of Donald Trump engaging in the politics of personal destruction, using his henchmen to go out and try to destroy others when he's losing. And I think, you know, these silly barbs and made-up stories did not come out early in the campaign because he felt he was doing okay.
You know, for the record, Trump has made clear he was not behind that report. He says he has nothing to do with it. And although the report cites Roger Stone, who was a Trump advisor at one time, he is no longer with the Trump campaign in any official capacity.
Well, I have no doubt that these things are made up in a certain place for a certain reason. And so we don't spend a lot of time talking about it on the campaign because we still have 16 states to win. We have 2 long months. You know, we're halfway through the calendar and more than halfway through the delegate count.
What kind of first lady do you think you'd be?
As I described to our daughters when we took this step last March to run for the presidency, I had to tell them that I would be taking a leave of absence and not going to the office every day. And they asked, what is a first lady? And I said, you know, it's an opportunity. It is the wife of the president. And my daughter Caroline said, oh, Mom, come on. Come on, what is a first lady? And I said, well, it's an opportunity to serve alongside the great things for others. And so I think that I would aspire to be a partner with Ted, but to do things for children, for entrepreneurship, and for school choice, but in a partnership format.
You are a Harvard MBA, managing director at Goldman Sachs, former Bush administration official, devout Christian, loving wife, loving mother. A lot of people are going to be saying Heidi Cruz for office. Could that ever happen?
Oh, no. I have one role in this campaign, and that is to help Ted win. And as I've gone through it, I've reflected on that time in my life where I was trying to find my role in the next chapter. And it is such a blessing to enjoy so fully the part that you play at this time. And I don't know what God has in store for me or for our family in the future, but I do know that right now I feel very fulfilled.
Good for you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Megan.